Hi friends, welcome to Classics in Color. My name is Mark Graves. Today I'm going to be discussing the Neo-Latin epic Syphilis by Fracastoro. Neo-Latin is basically the same thing as modern Latin, so anything that's written after the Roman Empire is good and gone. And during the Renaissance in particular, it was extremely popular. If you were an intellectual of that time, you were reading and writing in Latin. Fracastoro is no exception. He was also an intellectual writer as well as a doctor of his time. So he wrote this poem about syphilis in Latin. Now, it was a poem because he was imitating the ancient genre of didactic poetry. So didactic is actually closely related to epic poetry, so the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Aeneid. It has many similarities, but its difference is in the content. So it's about usually science or philosophy, but it's still supposed to be related to epic in that it's poetry, and it's supposed to be entertaining and enlightening. Make you feel good. So in many ways, it was sort of the popular documentary or the planet Earth of its day. His motivation for writing this poem was partly because he was a doctor, so he was interested in how this disease was working, its symptoms, and possible cures. But also, he had an interest in showing the Native Americans in a positive light. So he was very against the sort of demonization of Native Americans that was going on at this time, and he wanted to stop people blaming them for syphilis. So in his epic, syphilis doesn't come from the New World. One of the main cures actually comes from the New World. And very quickly, I'm going to just read to you a little bit of the prologue to show you some interesting things. So he says, "What were the varied accidents of matter? What the seeds which brought on unaccustomed disease through long centuries seen by no one, which in our time raged through all Europe? I shall now begin to sing, and through the liquid air and through the stars in vast Olympus I shall search for causes far hidden. Urania, you who know the causes of all things, be present." So here you can already see not only is it written in Latin, but he's referencing Urania, who is the muse of astronomy. He says he will sing, which is a classic thing to say at the beginning of an epic poem. Homer says that, of course, in the Iliad. And he also talks about seeds here. What he's referring to is probably the ancient theory of atoms. So he had read Lucretius, who was a big proponent of atomic theory. I've probably talked about him before on here, but he's incorporating that theory in how disease works. He's saying that disease is born in these seeds, these atoms across the world. Then I'm going to read to you a couple of fairly lengthy quotes describing the disease because it's actually absolutely terrifying. So he says, "Immediately unsightly sores broke out all over the body and made the face horrifyingly ugly and disfigured the breast by their foul presence. The disease took on a new aspect, pustules with the shape of an acorn cup and rotten with chick slime, which soon afterwards gaped wide open and flowed with a discharge like mucus and putrid blood. Moreover, the disease gnawed deep and burrowed into the inmost parts, feeding on its victims' bodies with piteous results. Mouths eaten away yawn open in a hideous gape while the throat produced feeble sounds. So someone sighing over the springtime of his life and his beautiful youth and gazing with wild eyes down at his disfingered members, his hideous limbs and swollen face, often in his misery railed against the gods' cruelty, often against the stars." So Fracastoro outlines several possible causes of this disease. He thinks it probably comes from swamps, and then he goes through different treatments that you should try. He especially recommends not getting too much sleep, not laying around, and actually getting up and exercising and working up a good sweat, which does not sound great, but his thought process behind this is that if you are working up a good sweat, your body's going to ooze out all the badness, all the disease. So that's where he's coming from. He also recommends to keep in a good mood and to restrict your diet. He advises a bunch of things you're not supposed to eat. For example, goose, cucumber, and lecherous onions. I do not know why onions are considered lecherous. Please let me know if you do. He also recommends bloodletting and quicksilver or mercury. So altogether, not amazing. So the possible causes, symptoms, and cures of syphilis are all in book 1 of this epic. Book 2, he takes a bit of a tangent to tell a myth about a fellow named Ilceus. And Ilceus gets syphilis and he has to go on this little adventure to find a cure. And he ends up going actually underneath the earth into this cave system, I guess, and meeting a bunch of nymphs there. And the nymphs aren't of trees or of water of any kind. They're actually nymphs of metals and rocks. So there's a nymph of gold, a nymph of copper. And that's the only place I've ever seen that before. So for that reason alone, I think that book is really interesting. Then in the book 3, Fracastoro basically tells the story of Columbus's first voyage to the New World. So Columbus encounters parrots almost right away, and these parrots talk to him and give him bad omens, basically saying, beware ye who enter here. And he then encounters some natives who are quite civilized and are able to talk to him almost right away. And they basically tell the story of how they discovered a cure for syphilis. And then Columbus is able to take one of their trees with him when he goes, and that's able to treat the people in Europe when they end up getting syphilis. I do need to mention real quick that when Fracastoro talks about syphilis, modern historians and doctors think that he's probably actually referring to quite a few diseases, that there are many diseases that ended up getting lumped under this term syphilis. So just so you know. Thank you so much for checking out this video on syphilis and Neo-Latin poetry. Thank you to everyone who is subscribed. I hope to have a video out for you next week. Karate.